With us being about a week removed from the release of Sonic and Shadow Generations, I wanted to finally offer my thoughts on the adventure as a whole, as well as some food for thought as to what unanswered questions have still stuck around even after everything is said and done. I'm going to throw up some unoptimized gameplay in the background since I don't want to spoil too many of the cutscenes and dialogue from the game, but be aware that I will go over some spoilers in this pseudo review and discussion. I also won't be going too much into Sonic Generations Remaster all that much, if at all, but it's still a great game. Let's begin. Overall, I found that the story of Shadow Generations is meant to serve a couple of purposes. Number one, believe it or not, this game acts as a replacement for the events that our favorite anti-hero goes through in Sonic 06. Case in point, Shadow must once again face an entity that tries to reel him back towards his initial line of thinking in Sonic Adventure 2. This rage-fueled and vengeful person who wants nothing more than to enact the same hurt he experienced onto those who are responsible either directly or by proxy. Ironically, this would coincide with a few theories that I've seen shared amongst the community as to why Black Doom specifically chose Radical Highway to be a recurring stage transition during all of the Act 1 playthroughs. The best way to learn something or relearn something is to do it over and over again. For those of you that have experienced the story of Shadow 05, you'll remember that he seemed to go through similar events to Shadow Generations, and even ended up reaching the same outcome. And that really depends on what you believe to be the true path of the game, but he removed himself from his past and is actively choosing to look towards the future. Where this game steps it up, however, is that this is a Shadow the Hedgehog who was convinced that he was fully over whatever hardships came with the death of the two people closest to him at the time. Think back to what I said a few moments ago about how this game acts to replace 06 from a narrative standpoint. Seeing as those events never happened, chances are that whatever growth occurred between Shadow 05 and Sonic 06, leading the Hedgehog into working with Gun explicitly, never took place in this real-world timeline. More than anything as it stands currently, Shadow simply tolerates Gun, but hasn't completely forgiven the events of the arc 50 years ago. Without that character development, we get this Shadow who still harbors that hate for everything leading up to and involving that one fateful night. Over the course of Shadow Generations, not only does our number 2 get to reconnect with Maria and Gerald, but us as players finally get to know more about them from Shadow's POV. This is a classic case of showing, not telling, the player that these two aren't just figures for us to feel sympathy for, but for their stories as well. While Gerald is no saint and arguably Eggman is a far more morally correct person, he is worth learning more about through both the journals and in-game dialogue that you can have with him. A scientist purely on the quest for knowledge as a means to an end for the granddaughter that he loves so much. He is willing to risk it all for the biscuit, even if that means striking a deal with the literal devil. It may be due to the voice clip snippets that play when sparking up a conversation, but towards the end of the game where he really begins to express just how wrong he was for putting quite literally everyone related to him in a mess of this magnitude, I can't help but feel for the guy. Maria, on the other hand, is an absolute doll. You can see exactly why, even with his programming, Shadow was so keen on keeping someone like her living the life that she deserved. She fills both the players and Mr. Edgy with this overwhelming sense of reassurance and need to remain grounded for all of the scenes that host her. Somewhat ironic that the moments relating to the person who is considered to be a parent to Shadow have this uneasiness and caution to them, while the other, who is considered to be his sister, takes on the role of comfort. This chronically ill 12-year-old girl is the antithesis to her grandfather in every way. The younger of the two humans present in the story seemingly have a better grasp on the emotional spectrum that someone exhibits, versus her late-age grandfather that has been in contact with countless more individuals throughout his lifetime. I believe the way that Maria is handled in the story puts an excellent cap on the need for her and her story to be relevant any longer in the series. Not to say that she can never be brought up anymore, but I think this is the last revisit to these two that we'll get for quite a while. To touch very quickly on Black Doom, the last quarter of this 4-sliced pie, I love that his story got a streamlined retelling of sorts. Shadow 05 was not the most cohesive game ever, and frankly was camp to a certain extent. Like with many other things, Shadow Generations aims to rectify this and make the entire experience more palatable for the common person. His motive is to have his army rise up again, and with the inadvertent help of the Time Eater, he's able to get one more shot in the dark at this. Of course, he fails, but he stands as an echo that constantly mocks Shadow throughout the entirety of the campaign. Seeing his taunts genuinely aggravate Shadow was shocking at first, as there was not much of a response outside of confusion and banter whenever Doom showed up in Shadow's original game. This man legitimately had our boy throwing fits and acting strangely out of character. But, looking back on it, if the one person that was responsible for toying with the ideologies imparted to me by my late family member suddenly came back out of nowhere after I sent him to the Shadow Realm, I'd want my lick back too. These main four were great to see back in action, and just like with Maria and Gerald, I think Black Doom's story has officially come to an end. This is the time where Shadow can officially move on with his life, embracing new connections and conquering newer enemies. Let's hope this trend continues. Shadow Generations sets what I feel like is going to be the standard for the adventure and boost formula hybrid that Sonic Team has been going for. There's really no way for me to describe how the game plays. Sure, I can say the game feels great to play, but I'd much rather you experience it for yourself. If you have the means, play around in Sonic Frontiers open zone for a bit and then switch over to the Shadow Generations hub world. Towards the end of Sonic Frontiers' life cycle, the movement got very good and very fun. Now, take all of that, tighten up the controls, but still offer various degrees of freedom and movement expression. You now have Shadow Generations hub world and stages. What I can say, however, is the fact that the hub world and stages themselves in this game feel good. There are multiple pathways that require you to pay attention in order to be prepared, set pieces that make environments that you're in have this distinct aura to them, and you get what you're shown from these places. You're in Space Colony Arc, boom, anti-gravity and space weaponry. You're on Chaos Island, windy paths that make it so without practice you're unsure about which one is the fastest. Each zone and the central area that they find themselves in are utilized to a great extent and have the player get the most out of their experience. Speaking of getting the most out of your experiences, we are back to having our characters possess unique skills that are true to them. They're not just here for show either. There were a couple of times where I'd kind of forget that I had Chaos Spear, for example, and I'd get punished for not utilizing the move by having to take a longer route. This game does an awesome job at having the player think about what their next move should be in the action stages. Frontiers is one of my favorite games, but outside of the boost and later on the spin dash, the cyberspace stages in that game were press boost to win. The open zone wasn't that much better with the combat, as you could spam the same kind of moves on different opponents to win. There is no best way to defeat certain enemies, but rather a nice and even split between the options you have at your disposal to help get faster times. The bosses continue to be cinematic masterpieces in this game, with the weakest probably being the Bio Lizard in my opinion. Not a bad boss by any means, just lower on the totem pole for me. I may be following in line with this, but by far the best is Mephiles. That delivery towards the end of the fight should get some type of award, honestly. Fingers crossed, Sonic Team keeps up these for the foreseeable future. The additional characters we meet along the way, Omega, Big, and Rouge, all offer interesting dialogue should you continuously speak to them as you progress through the story. I didn't include Orbot and Cubot in that listing, seeing as they're just a means to give you a reason to partake in the collectathon that this game has, but their addition and quirks are good to see again in the franchise. Going back to the original three I mentioned, I was pleasantly surprised with just how much we got from them in terms of references and callbacks. Numerous times, Omega will allude to caring about the other members of Team Dark in a way that he only knows how, to say that working with them is agreeable. He does break character once or twice by stating that he is relieved when Rouge is found to be alright, probably sometime after Sonic has cleared City Escape on his end. Other than that, he'll make note of how Metal Overlord is back and show a bit of anger and remorse for he and Shadow's decision to spare the robot at the end of Sonic Heroes. There's also this mention of how Shadow was designed to be the ultimate life form, but Sonic is his equal in all respects. Where it gets interesting though is that Omega cannot comprehend how Sonic the Hedgehog as an entity came to be, or what circumstances may have lined up for this to be the case. A couple of instances later, you'll run into Rouge after the arc cutscene with Sonic, which was beautifully done, may I add. And from this point, she's a mainstay in the hub world. Just like her giant robo friend, Rouge offers advice, comfort, and a sense of relief for Shadow for the remainder of the story. From what I can tell, she is here more so as a means to fill Shadow in as to what's going on with Sonic and his adventure, so that Shadow can expedite the tying up of loose ends on his side, and that he can have someone hanging out in front of Chaos Island as well. Either way, for me, the most notable line that she has is when she's made known to the fact that Omega and Shadow are both worried about her. Between that line, Omega's sigh of relief earlier in the game, and Dark Beginnings, this is a sign that Sonic Team is getting more comfortable with the idea of Team Dark being more than just co-workers again, which I love. Letting these characters show compassion for one another in the ways unique to them and their personalities is, and never was, a bad thing. Lastly, we have Big, and Shadow is strangely content with seeing him here. I don't think they've ever interacted in mainline media, but the conversations you can have with the cat are another nice break from the dire tone that this game has. From mentioning Soliana and Princess Elise, to confusing Omega with Gamma, and then admitting that his hidden cameos in Sonic Adventure 2 are indeed canon, Big being here is a nice change of pace. He is a curveball that I'm glad Sonic Team decided to pitch. Some final notes that I want to bring to light are the fact that the game isn't perfect. It is a solid 9 out of 10 as so many people have reported, but this is only the beginning. There are a few questions that I still have, such as 1. How did Black Doom mess with Shadow before the Time Eater, as far as we know, appeared? Dark Beginnings shows very obvious influence from the man as early as episode 1. And 2. Gerald makes note about how you're not supposed to interact with beings from another time. So what does that mean for Sonic interacting with his younger self? This may be the start of a retroactive fix from the plot hole that Forces left, stating that classic Sonic is from another dimension. If that's the case, should we just take that with a grain of salt and wait to see where it goes? Perhaps I'm looking too far into things and got used to Sonic games being self-contained due to the 2010s, but I do hope that these things get answered eventually. I love Shadow Generations and it's very quickly entered my top 5 Sonic games of all time. Once again, if you have the means to experience this game in any capacity, please partake in it as soon as you can. It is more than worth your time and a good indicator that everyone at Sonic Team is gearing up to deliver what we've been asking for years now. They have my unbridled trust if that game is coming sooner rather than later. I want to hear your opinions on Shadow Generations though. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Think it's the best game ever? I can't wait to talk about it with everyone, but for now, I'll catch you next time.